Between 1918 and 1922, Japan built the 15 ships of the 1,345-ton Minekaze class. If the earlier Momo and contemporary Momi classes were second-class destroyers, these were first-class destroyers. Larger than the Momis, they were all around better, and of course more expensive. It would be easy to call them enlarged Momis, in fact. They shared many of the same traits: the breakwater forecastle, torpedo tubes between the bow and the superstructure as in German ships, etc. That being said, they were larger, so they were more capable. They had 4 boilers instead of 3, which made them faster. They carried more fuel, which gave them a larger range. They had a 3rd pair of torpedo tubes. Most had a 4th 120mm gun behind the rear funnel, though on the last 3, this was moved aft to the rear superstructure to simplify shell handling. This in turn made the rear superstructure larger, which pushed the 2 rear banks of torpedo tubes together rather than having them separated as in the earlier ships. By World War II, these ships were obviously obsolete, most not even able to make 30 knots, so they were mostly used as convoy escorts. The real oddball was Minekaze, which spent the entire war escorting the carrier Hosho as she trained pilots. Between 1939 and 1940, 2 were converted into patrol boats. These were then again converted into fast transports in mid-1941. The fate of most is a good analogy for the merchant fleet they were meant to protect. Sunk by submarine, sunk by submarine, sunk by submarine, and so on. Minekaze was started April 20th, 1918 and completed May 29th, 1920. Sawakaze was started January 7th, 1918 and was completed March 6th, 1920. Okakaze was started February 22nd, 1919 and completed August 17th, 1920. Hakaze was started November 11th, 1918 and completed September 16th, 1920. Yakaze was started August 15th, 1918 and completed July 19th, 1920. Nadakaze was started January 9th, 1920 and completed September 30th, 1921. Shimakaze was started September 5th, 1919 and completed November 15th, 1920. Akikaze was started July 6th, 1920 and completed September 16th, 1921. Shiokaze was started May 15th, 1920 and completed July 29th, 1921. Yukaze was started December 14th, 1920 and completed August 24th, 1921. Hokaze was started November 30th, 1920 and completed December 22nd, 1921. Tachikaze was started August 18th, 1920 and completed December 5th, 1921. Nokaze was started April 16th, 1921 and completed March 31st, 1922. Namikaze was started November 7th, 1921 and completed November 11th, 1922. Numikaze was started August 10th, 1921 and completed July 24th, 1922. Main armament was 4 single open-mount 120mm 45 caliber guns, 1 at the bow, 1 between the 2 funnels, 1 behind the second funnel, except for the last 3 as stated where it was moved to the rear superstructure, and 1 at the stern. Torpedo armament was 3 twin mounts for 6 533mm torpedoes. 1 pair was between the bow and the superstructure. The other 2 pairs were between the rear funnel and the aft gun. All were at the main deck level. Finally, at the stern was rails for laying up to 20 mines plus minesweeping gear. Propulsion was provided by 4 boilers, 2 in 2 rooms, venting to 2 funnels. These provided steam to 2 turbines that generated 38,500 horsepower. Each, in turn, drove one of the 2 propellers for a top speed of 39 knots. They had 1 rudder. Modifications were mostly to make them useful escorts. In 1937, Yakaze was converted into a radio control ship for the former battleship turned target ship Setsu. The two midship 120mm guns, all the torpedo tubes, and the mines were removed, while a radio control shack was added. Between 1937 and 1940, the rest had ballast added following the two incidents which called into question the stability of most warships. Displacement rose to 1,552 tons, and speed fell to 36 knots. In 1939 through 1940, Shimakaze and Nadakaze were converted into patrol boats, PB 1 and 2 respectively. The two midship 120mm guns, the two rear torpedo mounts, the minesweeping gear, and the two rear boilers were removed, reducing their speed to 22 knots. In turn, fuel storage increased and displacement dropped to 1,390 tons. 16 depth charges along with sonar was added. In mid-1941, the two PBs were again converted into fast amphibious transports in preparation for war. The aft 120mm gun was removed, as were the forward torpedo tubes. The well left forward of the bridge was enclosed and turned into accommodations for 250 troops. The stern was sloped downward to launch two Daihatsu landing barges. In July of 1942, Yakaze was converted into a target ship herself. The rear boilers and the 120mm guns were removed, reducing her speed to 24 knots. From late 1942 to 1943, the ones that remained destroyers landed their two midship 120mm guns, two rear torpedo banks, mines, and minesweeping gear. In return, they gained sonar, two depth charge rails, and four depth charge throwers for 36 depth charges. In late August 1944, Minekaze had her stern blown off by the submarine's seal. Towed to port, she was converted into a Kaiten carrier. All but her forward 120mm guns were removed. Her first boiler was removed, dropping her speed to 24 knots, and her stern was sloped downward to allow the launching of up to 4 Kaiten. In January 1945, Yakaze was returned to service. She regained her number 1 and 4 120mm guns, 4 torpedo mount, and 36 depth charges along with sonar. In April 1945, Sawakaze traded a 120mm gun and a torpedo mount for a 9-barreled 150-round anti-submarine rocket launcher. Too little, too late. Okikaze was sunk January 10, 1943, southeast of Yokosuka by the submarine Trigger. PB-1 was sunk at Kavang January 13, 1943, by the submarine Guardfish. Hakaze was sunk January 23, 1943, southwest of Kavang, also by Guardfish. Minekaze was sunk December 19, 1943, northeast of Okinawa by the submarine Grayback. Tachikaze was sunk at Truk by carrier aircraft February 2, 1944. Minekaze was sunk February 10, 1944, near Formosa by the submarine Pogi. Hokaze was sunk July 6, 1944, near the Celebes by the submarine Paddle. Namikaze was damaged beyond repair September 8, 1944, when she hit a mine laid by the submarine Seal. Post-war, she was transferred to the Chinese. Akikaze was sunk November 3, 1944, west of Luzon by the submarine Pintado. Shiokaze was damaged beyond repair January 31, 1945, by carrier aircraft. She was scrapped in 1948. Nokaze was sunk February 20, 1945, off Cape Varela by the submarine Pargo. Ukaze was damaged by carrier aircraft while in port July 18, 1945, and scrapped in 1947. Patrol Boat 2 was sunk July 25, 1945, east of Surabaya by the British submarine Stubborn. Sawakaze and Yakaze were surrendered and scrapped in 1948.